Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. We're really excited to be talking to you guys today about the relationship between schools, districts, and their service providers. And so my name is Ruth Abbey. I'm with the Northern California Recycling Association Zero Waste Schools Committee. And I am here to kind of introduce the speakers and kind of kick it off. And our goal today is to have a fairly informal discussion about the advantages and disadvantages of different approach and what's available to school districts. So I'm going to kick it off, but in a few minutes, I'll be handing it over to Nancy Deming from Oakland Unified to talk about their recent experiences procuring services from recycling, composting, trash collection service provider. And we will also be hearing from Christian Thornley, who was their selected service provider, Waste Management. Then we'll be hearing from Teresa Montgomery with South San Francisco Scavenger, and she'll be relaying her top opportunities for increasing success with schools and school districts and working with haulers. And then we're going to have kind of an informal check-in from a number of different folks in different areas of the field that are working with schools, just to give a perspective from different options. So we'll hear from Tim Duematia from Napa Recycling and Waste Services, Emmi Hashimi from Rethink Waste, which is a joint powers authority of a number of jurisdictions in San Mateo County, and Darya Sufi, who is from the San Francisco Unified School District, and she also has a contract with her service provider. So I'll kind of get going and go over a few intro slides, and then we'll turn it over to the speakers. Housekeeping, just to let you know, we are recording this, so please turn off your video if you don't want to be recorded. And mute your audio if you are not speaking, and put your questions for the speakers in the chat. We may elect to call on you if you want to give kind of a longer intro or discuss your question, but go ahead and let us know that you want to ask a question by putting it in the chat. And then the video recording, presentation slides, and additional information is available at the website, nicararecycles.org, and the Zero Waste Schools webpage. Amanda will be putting that link in the chat so you can kind of follow along with one of the resource guides that Amanda and Nancy have put together. So let's kind of get going. First of all, just to remind everybody, and we talked about this at the last first webinar that we had a couple of months ago, all schools must recycle and compost. This is now required by state law through several different state legislative requirements, AB 341, 1826, 1383, and now AB 827, which does require 3 streams, a collection of both recycling and organics where food is served. So this is a major area of expansion of need in our schools across California. So we wanted to be able to provide resources to you about models that are working in different parts of the state. A couple of ideas around service models, and this is the service model between the service provider and the district or the schools. There are many models that work, and they can all work. So it's just a matter of developing that relationship and working with what you have to get what you want. We're going to be talking about some schools that use the city's contractor. So some school districts just go ahead and they act like any other commercial business in the city, and they receive the services from the franchise or contracted service provider that services the rest of the community. And so here are some examples of school districts, and we're going to be hearing from some of them today, who use the city's contractor. Some of the advantages and disadvantages of using the city's contractors. So big advantages: you match the city's program and you don't need to manage a contract. Those are kind of big advantages. They often include extra technical assistance and support because cities are required under state law to provide technical assistance to their commercial generators. And so if you are part of the city's system, you are going to be getting not only technical assistance, but also possibly enforcement. Oftentimes recycling and composting are subsidized through the rate base. So you may only be paying for garbage collection and you know, kind of unlimited recycling and composting is no extra charge. And in some cases, the services are provided to schools for free because the cities have included them as free collection in their franchise agreements. So that can be a big opportunity, a big advantage for using the city's contractor. Some of the disadvantages, there's less control because you are under the city's contract. There may include city fees like franchise fees, AB 939 fees, SB 1383 fees, administrative fees that are kind of added onto the cost of service. And so you will be paying that as a commercial generator, commercial customer under the city's contract. So sometimes, you know, you get what you pay for, but in other cases, you know, you would be required to pay some of these other cities' fees. And the services might not include all of those services that a school needs, you know, special pickups, construction and demolition, you know, clean outs, other things that you may need as extra services, and you would have to pay extra for that. You can also have your own contract. A number of school districts have their own contracts, including Alameda Unified. Oakland, will be hearing from Oakland. San Francisco is here. And we have some examples that we'll be talking about from San Mateo County, where schools have their own contracts, and so the services from the city or from, you know, the Joint Powers Agency are provided, you know, separately. Some of the advantages and disadvantages of having your own contract. Some of the advantages are you can specify the services specifically for what you want, and it can include additional amenities, and we'll hear a little bit about that. So for example, staff support, you can specify that you want a dedicated recycling coordinator. You can include equipment like bins and signage as a part of the contract. Therefore, you don't have to have a different line item at your school budget for that. And it is potentially less expensive than compared to city services for the reasons that we said. Some of the disadvantages are that it may require more management and oversight, and you might not be able to attract all of the service providers to propose, because if you are a relatively small district compared to a big city, or there aren't a lot of service providers operating in your area, that might be a disadvantage. So I think that's it in terms of what I wanted to go over. And now I wanted to sort of hand it over to Nancy to give us the Oakland Unified story.
Sorry, technical difficulties on managing that mute button. Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, so for Oakland Unified, it definitely, you know, we've always taken, it takes a village approach, and our hauler contract, we've been fortunate. We've had, since I've been with Oakland for 12 years now, it's been waste management. And we've gone through like 3 renewals with it. One was an original contract, then a renewal, and then a new contract, which was a year ago. But the partnership on the contract details and then the relationship, like we wouldn't be where we are without our hauler, without waste management, without that team approach. And one of the signatures things that we did early on was we had a lot of problems with custodians being on board, getting them engaged, kind of fired up with the idea. We had some that were on board, but then getting the whole district. And this was back when it wasn't my job and it's going to be too much work. So between our relationship with waste management, we hosted green gloves of symposiums and got the custodians more involved. It was a 2-hour event once a year. And that pretty much stabilized our program to where we've had that longevity because of that collaborated effort to host really strong events, get the custodians engaged. I would say one of the other challenges is just kind of going through staff changes. That definitely has been a little bit of a hit on my side, just with the staff changeovers with the hauler, which emphasizes even more so on it really being important to have a strong contract, strong relationship in place, because in that way, when staff changes, you already have the basis that's set up there. And with that in mind, when we needed to renew our contract this last year, that was kind of forefront in my mind. Like, we really wanted to provide as much detail into our RFP that was going to address some of those concerns. And I feel very fortunate that Darya at San Francisco Unified, they had just finished renewing their contract. So they had really robust language. I just copied and pasted and then adjusted certain areas that was going to fit better for Oakland setting and where our program was at. One of the things I really appreciated in the San Francisco contract was we've always had a recycling coordinator kind of designated to assist us. San Francisco put in the amount of hours per week. I'm like, that really helps on just being really clear with what the ask is. So I included that. The other thing that we did in our previous renewal of the previous contract that we had with Waste Management was foresight for our custodial director to work in the language that certain funds were going to be dedicated towards my position. So of course, right, we know that just means that the bill's going to be somewhat padded from Waste Management, but that secures the position within the school district to protect my role. So that I thought was a really smart thing to do. And I've been on the chopping block 2 times, and it just doesn't make sense to cut my position because 3/4 of it is coming off of the Waste Management contract dedicated funds. And then the other piece is that we've always asked for part of the contract supplies and materials, because that makes a big difference as well. In the past, they were smaller amounts per year. They're in the $7,000 range, and now they're in the $50,000 range because we're getting ready to ramp to be district-wide. So with that, if I can pass it over to Christian, and Christian, if you want to share out some on what your team's experience has been on the waste management side with Oakland Unified, that would be great.
Yeah, I would say, so I'm Christian Thornley. I'm the account manager with Waste Management. I was introduced to Nancy probably in March of last year. I started with Waste Management in December of 2019. So it's kind of a challenging time to get introduced, to say the least. But I would say our approach is really just a team approach. I see a couple of my teammates on the call today, Sarah LaRock for public sector, Dan Newman, who's a recycling coordinator. Nancy and our team have monthly calls to go through all the schools, all the issues that they may have, challenges that we may have with the schools. We really keep the communication open. I would say there isn't a day that goes by that Nancy and I don't communicate in some way. And through that communication, it's really made the relationship strong, and it's made getting through a challenging year a lot easier. A couple of things that we like to do. We have which I think is our saving grace, that the best thing that we have. We have a dedicated inbox through our customer support team that Nancy and her team can communicate with, which is really great because our team, they're very quick to respond. They have personal relationships with Nancy and her team. I feel like that is really the strongest part of a relationship, just having that resource for the school district. And then I mentioned the monthly meetings. So Sarah and Dan have a monthly meeting with Nancy. The sales team, account management team has a monthly meeting with Nancy, and we're very open. We communicate openly, anything we see with the schools, we're monitoring with recycling. We're monitoring any incidents that happen, and we're communicating those over to Nancy and her team. So really, I believe that the strong open communication between Waste Management and Oakland Unified has made the relationship better. And then, you know, once restrictions start getting lifted, obviously, you know, schools are slowly starting to reopen. You know, we're gonna get together, do site visits, make sure that each school is right sized, and you know, make sure that the relationship is strong moving forward. So thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Christian. Nancy, did you want to move on to Teresa?
Yeah, that sounds great. And she has a slide, right?
Yeah. Well, so I'll turn it over Teresa Montgomery, who is with South San Francisco Scavenger, who works with a number of different school districts and has some advice for us.
Thanks, Ruth. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here and to kind of represent as a hauler. The company I work for, South San Francisco Scavenger, provides services in the north end of San Mateo County. So if I look out my window right now, I'm looking at SFO, give you an idea. There's several school districts in our service area or in and around our service area. The San Mateo Union High School District is one of them, and they have only high school campuses, no elementary, no middle school. And their furthest south school is down in Redwood Shores, I believe, and the furthest north is up San Bruno Millbrae Way. So there's only one of their schools in our service area, and the others are in several others. We provided service for the one high school in our area for many years, but at some point they decided to go out to bid, get their own hauler, and they went with low bid. And they ended up with a debris box hauler that hauls only mixed waste. And what happened was, over several years of students asking for recycling and some dedicated staff members asking for recycling, it's only been in the last maybe 2-3 years that those high schools have finally had any kind of recycling service there. As a hauler who provides service in the residential areas around one of those high schools, it's been super frustrating, because here we are working very hard to deliver this message that it's important to sort your waste at home, in parks, in business areas, and there's kids that had no recycling at all in school, and there was literally nothing we could do about it. And then we also have several other school districts I want to mention. The South San Francisco School District is probably the biggest in our area. They have several elementary, middle, and high schools. And they have a really unique situation in that many years ago, they invested in their own rear loader truck that they send around to their sites and pick up trash, and then they take it directly to a transfer station. So they do that, and we provide recycling services on site, no charge. As 1826 gained steam and they needed to add organics, we found a lot of difficulties in that. To date, they have only a few sites that have offered organic service. They're working on a plan to roll it out to everybody else, hopefully next year. But because of this kind of unique situation where they run their own truck, and they don't have internal bins set up yet for the collection of organics, I think it just feels very overwhelming. And there's costs involved. If they pick up the material and deliver it, it's one cost. If we provide bins, it's another. Unfortunately, organic service, at least in our area, is pretty expensive to provide. We pick up organics and process it through anaerobic digestion and then send it up to Tim to do his magic and turn it into fantastic soil amendment. But it's not a service we're able to offer for free. So for the schools to add that service, it's kind of a big deal. We also provide service in Millbrae, and I can't say enough for how well Millbrae has rolled out programs to their schools in the last couple of years. For a while, they were hesitant because of the same reason I'm saying about organic service being expensive. They had a hard time justifying putting a bin that would have an additional cost on site. But with 1826 ratcheting down, they kind of felt like they had to comply. And we were able to decrease their garbage service and save them money on that and put that money towards organic service. So it turned out to kind of be a wash when we added those services for them. But what really makes the Millbrae School District a great example to follow is that they really embraced the program. Once they decided that they were going to add their organic service and comply with 1826, they were all in. So Ruth, if you'll put up my slide, I would like to go over the little points on it.
Here we go.
Because I could spend several minutes talking about things that prevent success at school, but I don't really want to do that. I will mention that I have seen, I'll call it custodial sabotage, be a problem many times, where inside classrooms and offices, everybody sorts everything correctly, and then the custodian picks it all up, mixes it up, and puts it in the wrong bin. I have seen district or principal avoidance, where they've been approached by parents, haulers, community groups to add services, and they just kind of hide because they're not ready to tackle it. I have seen programs be temporarily successful on campuses because parents or PTA groups willed it to happen. I've seen people who live across the street from a school wheel their own containers over to the campus to provide the opportunity for kids to sort during lunch or during special events. But my top 5 slide here is what I really want to focus on. After years working for haulers, these are the things that I think I want everybody to take away from today. If you're going to have a successful program at your school and in your district, there's got to be a top-down commitment. If everyone buys in like Millbrae did, from the district office to the principal, to the teachers and students and the custodians, you're going to have a much better chance of being successful long-term. Because a hauler and a parent group and a leadership group of students can come in and set up a program one week, but if you don't have that top-down support, eventually you're going to have to start over. People graduate, move on, they lose interest. If you don't constantly have that top-down drive to keep a program in place and to provide what is needed to make it be successful, whether it's bins and signage, assemblies, what have you, it has to keep coming consistently. The other thing is equity across the district. It's super frustrating as a hauler when you have one school that is willing to throw everything they've got at a proper program, and then the school down the street doesn't. Or an elementary school has a great program and the middle school doesn't. I mean, you're teaching these kids that this message of waste reduction and reuse and recycling is important only when it's convenient. And that's not what we want. We want an equitable program that everyone across the district has access to. And then my third bullet, the knowledge of waste generation. It's so important when you go onto a campus and you know that the people there, your champions at that site, have a good understanding of what's in the waste. They know what's being purchased, what's being brought from home, what is going in the trash, what does the cafeteria waste look like, how much of it, what's the volume and variety of material. When you go to a campus and try to talk trash and they haven't even looked, and you flip open a bin and they go, oh, we use those kinds of trays. That slows things down. So it's really great to have somebody who's paying attention to the waste generation. And when you have that kind of knowledge too, you know that your efforts to reduce waste are going to be more successful. There's a lot of things you can do purchasing wise from a district level that will reduce your waste. Moving on down, the understanding of available waste services and costs, that's key too. I can't tell you how many times there's been maybe a conference about school recycling where everybody has talked about all these great things you can do and that work. And then haulers will take calls from teachers saying, okay, well, we want to start this service, We're like, okay, but you know, the only person authorized to add service on your account is at the district office. Or somebody will ask for, like for us, somebody will call and ask for mixed waste recycling. We don't do that. And for recycling, we do multiple streams at our company. We separate bottles and cans from paper. So sometimes people call us and ask for service that doesn't exist. Sometimes schools call and they assume that whatever they're asking for will be given for free, because maybe they talk to somebody where that is the case, but it's not the case here. So it's great to have someone who really understands what is offered and what the costs are before they call us. And then the number one thing I actually have last on my list is designated champions at the district level and at each site. It is so awesome to have a point person that you go to when there's an issue. Right now we have that at a couple of schools, but not at all of them. And I'm telling you, the schools that have somebody whose eyes are, you know, on the scene all the time and whose boots are on the ground, that is the winning ticket right there. Because you can, if you've got somebody to work with on site, you can troubleshoot anything. So that's really it on my slide. I don't know if anyone has questions. I talked really fast because I don't want to take a whole lot of time.
Let's have a quick pause, Jill, and see if there are any questions for Teresa.
You bet. We had some questions for waste management. I think that was answered. The one question that I'm seeing is more of a statement about composting for the gardens. I think we can move on to the next speaker. I'm not seeing anything directly for Teresa, but if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question that's not in the chat, please go right ahead.
I will add,
go ahead, Teresa.
I'd like to add one more thing. I mentioned that Millbrae Schools has been just wonderful to work with. And part of the reason too is that County of San Mateo, the Office of Sustainability and the Office of Education have a really strong presence here. So together, what they bring, what the hauler brings, and what a school district that's dedicated brings together, that whole combination has allowed us to pay for things, plan for things, add things to the curriculum, and make a really successful program. So I think that, you know, always knowing who your resources are and building your team is key as well.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Teresa. I wanted to let everybody know Teresa was the inspiration for this webinar, because when we first said we were going to launch a webinar series addressing schools, Teresa said, well, you really better talk about, you know, service provision and best practices for working with the hauler. So thank you so much for Teresa for your presentation. I'm going to go ahead and call on Tim from Napa Recycling. And Tim has an example of a community where he is providing services to schools through the city's contract. So Tim, if you could talk a little bit about your experiences and what you're seeing from your point of view.
Sure, thanks, Ruth. So again, Tim Duamity, I work for Napa Recycling and Waste Services. We're the franchise hauler in Napa. We also operate the Napa Recycling and Composting Facility that gets Teresa's organics, among others. So in Napa, the Napa Valley Unified School District, there's about 25 school sites in our service area. And they actually have an MOU directly with the city of Napa. Originally, 20 years ago, they self-hauled their own garbage. They had a rear loader. They didn't do any recycling. So they realized that that was untenable in the long term and wanted to use a franchise hauler. And the city of Napa has an MOU that says that they must use the city's franchise hauler. In return, they get a list of services, including assistance, and they get a discounted rate. They pay a bundled rate that is a significant discount if they paid like for each of those a la carte options as a commercial customer in the city of Napa. And it just goes up by CPI, you know, a couple % each year. So as the franchise hauler, then we service all the school sites and really kind of as commercial customers, they get the same types of service. It's our commercial routes that service them. They can make service requests through our customer service and operations center. One of the things that works well in that MOU is the technical assistance, and interior equipment is key. So all commercial customers in Napa can get interior equipment for recycling and composting at no charge along with their service. So that's provided for all the school sites. This last year has been crazy, but one thing that the school district actually worked, it was their idea to do it, and we kind of helped support it, was to put organics collection into all the classrooms. Because paper towels is a thing that they noticed, especially, and sometimes people eat in the classrooms. So we've gotten all the school sites set up with organics collection in the classrooms, at least most of them. It's actually hard to figure out how many classrooms there are in a school district. And so all of the sites have organics collection through kind of our commercial organics collection program for this whole school. And obviously some school sites, it's been mentioned, are better than others. But one of the things that we've all tried to do, and we have quarterly meetings with the school district, the city, outreach staff, and our staff, is to kind of really have district-wide consistency. Teresa mentioned equity across all school sites, and that is kind of having all the programs be the same at each school site was important to the district. And I think that kind of hits on a topic that was brought up in the chat. Getting custodial buy-in is huge, and the custodians have to deal with a lot of crap, and they don't get paid enough. And they has some, and some of the custodians were grumbling, and some of them are really big champions. But it was to kind of really focus on additional unnecessary work, and that was getting rid of extra trash and recycling and bins around the school. And so the school district, this was a while ago, said every classroom would only have one trash and one recycling, and it'd be the same in every classroom. They're 23-gallon recycling, and now we have a 10-gallon compost. And a lot of the bins we kind of consolidated, as we know more is not always better for trash recycling and compost collection, and kind of targeting putting bins in places where they need to be empty, but not giving the custodial staff extra work, where they had to empty bins, and now they had 3 bins to empty. So that helped with some of the concerns. And the other thing was to bring all the custodians out for a tour of our facility. So we bring school groups, we bring teachers and the students, at least when there's not a pandemic. But we brought all the head custodians out for a tour a couple times of our facility to see why it was important. They're part of our team. So that's a really big thing that's helped with us. And I guess the other thing would be the city of Napa has a staff member, 50% of the time works just on school outreach. It's not enough, but it helps. We wish we had a full person, but that's paid through the rates. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention was extra services is actually written into the MOU. So not just kind of weekly service, but the school district has an allotted amount of C&D boxes and yard waste boxes and other debris boxes. And actually they get I think it's 12 mixed debris boxes a year before they have to start paying the commercial rate, but they get unlimited amounts of source separated boxes, like for yard trimmings, for recyclables. So they're actually incentivized when they do construction projects or any kind of work around the school sites to try to keep stuff separated. So that's worked pretty well. So I think that's kind of all I had. Obviously everything's not perfect, and each school site is different, but we have a pretty good program set up that's about 50% diversion rate for school district sites. So we're trying to get to 75, just like everybody else. And I think a lot of that is organics diversion going forward. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Tim. There's some lively chat going on, but we're going to hear from Emmi and Darya first, and then we'll kind of open it up to dialogue. So thanks so much, Tim. I'd like to call on Emmi from Rethink Waste. Rethink Waste comes from from the public agency perspective. They provide, they oversee the recycling and composting systems in the cities within their district. But then the schools are not a part of their franchise collection program that they oversee. So Emmi's team provides outreach and technical assistance to schools, even when it's sometimes a different hauler than what is provided through the city's contract, or the agency's contract. So Emmi, did you want to kind of talk about your experiences and your observations?
Sure. Thank you so much, Ruth. You already did my introduction for me, so that's great. But again, my name is Emmi Hashizume, and I'm the Environmental Education Manager for Rethink Waste. And like Ruth said, we are a joint powers authority for San Mateo County. JPA is kind of a vague word that I didn't know what it meant either, but basically, yeah, it just means that we handle the waste services and manage the franchise agreement for our 11 member agencies. That include cities, but do not include the different school districts within the cities. So my team gets to lead tours of the Shoreline Environmental Center, and then our main focus, though, is implementing the composting and recycling programs on school campuses. I think most of us on this call know that starting diversion programs at schools is tricky enough, but again, as Ruth noted, it's even trickier since our service area has a lot of different school districts that all have their own individual contracts with the hauler. So we're still streamlining the processes that we use since our school's program is only about 2 to 3 years old. But basically we found that it's really important to just have a lot of friends in a lot of different places. And what I mean by that is just we have a lot of regular communication with all the different haulers. Some of them have become our very good friends since we bother them a lot. We have a lot of questions for them. We email them. We have meetings with them. Constant communication. I think Nancy said this too with their hauler. Just having a strong relationship with them is really important. So you're comfortable asking those questions, getting those updates, and coordinating with them a good amount. So as I said, our program is pretty new, but we do the past 2 or 3 school years, we have checked in with our haulers at the beginning and at the end of each school year just to see if there's any updates for acceptable items, if there's any changes to what items go in the different bins, bin liner policies, and then if there have been any changes to district contracts or schools, school service levels. And then we also review our presentation and educational materials with the haulers just to make sure our resources are accurate and that our messaging is really as seamless as possible and standardized. And then finally, we also do perform joint site visits with the haulers when we can. So we invite them to come out to the schools when we visit them so they can look at the bins with us. They also have great recommendations. And so the schools are also familiar with, who is servicing them, since it's confusing because Rethink Waste does not provide the waste services. We are just offering the education and all of the waste infrastructure that they're going to be using. And then finally, Teresa mentioned this, but one of the best things that has happened over the past year or so is that in San Mateo County, we've formed a working group that includes us, staff from the county's Office of Ed and the county's Office of Sustainability, and haulers like Teresa. And this has been really, really helpful since we've been able to meet as a larger network, and we address challenges together. We talk about best practices, and then we've collaborated on some joint resources like a guide to school reopenings that includes very specific information about waste programs. And then we're currently working on a nice little informational pamphlet that includes commonly asked questions and challenges that schools are facing. So getting to work with everybody on that. So there's one thing that we could point people to has been really, really helpful.
Thanks so much, Emmi. And I wanted to give a shout out to Emmi and her team. They are really providing some tremendous resources out there. And I want to let everybody know that we in kind of the school recycling and composting community, we love to share our resources. And I really encourage you to take a look at the Rethink Waste site and reach out to Emmi if you'd like to build on what they have, because we don't want to have everybody reinvent the wheel. We want you to use our stuff. So thank you so much, Emmi. And speaking of using their stuff, I did want to introduce Darya from San Francisco Unified. When we first started working on recycling and composting in schools, of course, we looked to San Francisco, which had been an innovator for the past 20 years or more. So I think, the first and maybe the best example of how to implement recycling and composting across a huge number of schools. I think, Darya, you can address some of those issues about piloting, about what your experiences have been, what it's like to work with a contracted hauler. That happens also to be the city's hauler, but under a different contract. So please welcome Darya.
Hi, thanks, Ruth. Hi, everyone. My name is Darya Sufi. I'm the Zero Waste Manager for the San Francisco Unified School District. I work within the Sustainability Department there. We have an office in the school district for sustainability, which is great and unique. I know some districts don't have that. And so I can't take credit for all of the awesome historical work that has been done. I've been in the district for about 5 years, and you know, we've kind of shifted a lot of our focus because we had such ambitious goals early on. But Nick Kestner, sustainability director, was a visionary and passed a board resolution in 2003 to reach an 85% diversion rate by 2025, which is approaching. And we're about at 65% right now, and have plans to continue to move that number, which was really great. I'd say if anyone's working at a district now and needing some like first steps to try to get rolling, getting a board resolution passed was like the big lever to try to help all of his initiatives roll forward. And so I always reference that. It's a strong talking point in getting a lot of things done from the sustainability perspective. I'd say if anyone hasn't passed one or wants to like update or add another, I wish we would have had a reduction goal set in that board resolution as well, not just to increase our composting and recycling to 85%, but also to set reductions for all 3 waste streams. I think that would have helped a lot with our projects in reducing our student food lunch waste. We have a lot of plastic and a lot of it's recyclable, but it's so it seemed great, and we, you know, recycling is a huge part of our waste stream, but we don't have internal structures or policy to say like, let's reduce that recycling number. Anyway, so I've been asked to talk a lot about the contract because we just renewed our contract a couple years ago, and it's really helped push some of our initiatives forward. Because prior to that, our contract was not really the big lever. It was that board resolution that helped move our work, and huge help from Recology and who is our waste hauler, and the SF Department of the Environment, which is the city department funded by the rates of the city, the waste rates. And they have a school education team. I think it's kind of similar to Rethink Waste. They provide a lot of education. Basically, you know, Recology and SFE were working with the school district before the sustainability office was even created. So that was what moved a lot of the composting and recycling initiatives forward. Before our office came and kind of stepped in. So Recology, for those of you that don't know, city voters have awarded them a monopoly on waste hauling for San Francisco. So we've always worked with them. They've always been our hauler, and we currently renegotiated our contract, our $1.2 million contract to last 5.5 years. The half year thing was just to align with our fiscal year because it hadn't been before, and that was always wonky. And I'll just kind of go through the positives of the contract and then some kind of like downsides or things that were a little rougher. It was a long negotiation, but I think it produced a really good product. So the positives that came out of it were a $10,000 diversion innovation fund that we negotiated. So Recology provides us with that fund every year. If we don't spend it, it rolls over. And it's mainly to just, there was a lot of conversations around how to, you know, we're a high diverting school district. And so we were thinking we need to get creative about how to get to 85%, and we need resources for that as always. And we didn't have a dedicated fund for that. We didn't have any money in our office to put towards zero waste. So we figured, you know, could Recology give us some money each year to do so? And they agreed to a $10,000 fund. I spend it a lot on like enclosures or bins. Like one example is our early education students are like really young kids there's compliance regulations around like what kind of bin they need in their classroom. They need compost bins with like lids, and same with recycling bins. And though in our contract, Recology provides bins to us to up to 20 schools per year, they don't come with lids, and they're not of a specific size. So it kind of gives us some money to like fit those little gaps and needs. As Nancy mentioned, we have a 20-hour per week staff person from Recology that dedicates her time to meeting with me and SF Department of the Environment and strategizing around our zero waste goals. And she specifically does, that's what is super helpful, is she does a lot of the adult education, because SF Department of the Environment is the school ed team. They do student education, like the assemblies for kids and the classroom presentations, but all the adults, like the teachers and the custodians, they need training as well. And so that person kind of dedicates her time toward that. And she does site audits. That was something that was a part of the contract we negotiated was, okay, you know, we're going to really need to tighten up on our contamination. And we want to improve composting in the district because SB 1383 is coming. So, you know, can they give us some sort of support in the waste auditing? And so she conducts these really great audits, gives us reports on that. As mentioned, they give us signage and they replace any broken bins. That's something that was, you know, if it's not in your current contract at the district, I would put that in there because bins get broken a lot. And we have a diversion discount that we kind of had we had an inferior discount and structure before. I'd say in our old contract, it was like if we met a range, if we achieved a range of diversion rate across the district, we'd get bumped into this kind of lower rate tier. And that sounded really great, but it was really hard. Like across over 100 schools on average, like our diversion rate moves like a tick if we change diversion rates at like 10 schools, which is a ton of work. So we wanted to apply the diversion discount per school. And so the way it goes is each school gets a diversion rate that we calculate for them based on what their percentage of composting and recycling is. So say a school is diverting 75% of their waste through composting and recycling, they take that number and they subtract 25%, just standard 25%, and then they'll have a 50% discount on their bill. And that's what happens at all the schools. And so we get a huge discount. So it's a huge incentive, financial incentive to continue to increase composting and recycling, or, you know, manipulate the diversion rate by reducing our landfill service. So those are all the positives of the contract. Some like reluctant kind of negatives that we had to, you know, come to terms with was the Recology, since they provide to all of the residents and commercial customers in the city. They wanted to really get the district on their commercial rate structure, which we hadn't before. For some reason, we had, you know, not had that. We had this huge discount, which was awesome. And we should, we're a school district. But anyway, they really pushed for that. So that bumped us just right off the bat when our new contract started to like 10% more than what we were paying, which was huge. That was a lot to kind of swallow. And then there on out to kind of like ease us into the commercial rate structure, we were going to get an 8.5 increase in rates across compost, recycling, and trash every year. And so that's kind of how we got to the diversion discount. We're like, we need a way to mitigate these increases. This is huge. And so since the city of San Francisco has huge diversion goals and Recology is a part of that, they agreed to give us that diversion discount. And then lastly, we have contamination fees that start in this contract. We negotiated like an 18-month moratorium on the fees starting because that has we've never been charged for contamination before. It's not to say that it shouldn't have happened, but we were really nervous about our, like as most of you know who work in school districts and track diversion rates, it can just be a number. Like a school can be diverting 75%, but then in actuality at the school, they're sorting very, you know, poorly, but the service looks great. They have like 20 compost bins, but they're all missorted. So we were really nervous about the contamination fees and wanted ways in which we could ease into that and educate and focus, like kind of give a lot of attention to this new focus of like, okay, we want to increase composting, recycling, but we also want to really sort better, and behavior is so hard to control. So anywho, they agreed to not starting the fees until 18 months. And we negotiated a really, really strong process for them notifying us of the contaminants. So when they notify us, they have to tell us what's in the bins. There's a sequence of, I think, like 4 or 5 letters to the custodial director, to the director of sustainability, and to our chief facilities officer, where custodial and facilities sit under our facilities division. So these big heads get this letter saying, hey, this school or this property is contaminating with these contaminants. You should go check it out. Your fee won't, this is your first warning. And if nothing happens, then they get a second letter and it's like, hey, we told you about this, go check it out. And I think after like the third, they give us like a half, they charge us for half of what the normal fee would be, just as like a kind of a warning. And then throughout this whole process, we have an opportunity to submit like a waiver, like, oh, this contaminant came from us renting this school on the weekend to some church group, and we don't educate those people on the weekends. And so, we have to this isn't really our responsibility, but we'll try to manage that, but we shouldn't be paying that fee. So there's opportunities to kind of avoid the fees or negotiate the fees. And so that I think we really spent a lot of time on because it's so brand new. And Recology also has the ability to kind of track those contaminants because they have a technology called Routeware on I think a half of their fleet that takes photos as they dump the toters into their trucks. And so they could even give us photos of what they're noting as contamination. It took them, this is new technology for them, so they're still onboarding their staff to that. So the contamination fees haven't really even quite started, even though we're over 18 months into our new contract, because they need to get clear on their side too. So it's constant discussion and figuring out our process. But those are kind of the categories I wanted to share, but there's plenty more to talk about. And if anyone wants to talk about contracts, you feel free to email me, but I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Darya. It's amazing to hear your story and learn from your experience. We wanted to remind everybody that the resources available on the NICRA website, which Amanda will repost in the chat, will include the San Francisco contract, San Francisco Unified contract, the Oakland Unified contract, some board resolutions and other materials. So don't reinvent the wheel. Go on the website, talk to everybody, get resources. And that's also the place where you'll be able to see access to the recording from this webinar in case you or a colleague missed some of it and you want to share it with others. And it will also be the place to see the notes and presentation materials and where you can find out how to register for the May 6th webinar, which will be focusing on working with custodians and custodial unions. It's not quite, the registration page is not quite up yet, but if you check back in a week or so, you'll be able to register for our next webinar on May 6th. So thank you, Darya. I wanted to hand it over to Jill now to kind of facilitate a little Q&A. So Jill, you want to take it away?
Good. You got it. Thanks, Ruth. So we've had several good questions in the chat, and I'm going to go in order. If we're not able to get to your question, we will post the answers on the NICRA website, same place that Ruth has been directing you. So we're just going to go in order and do as many as we can. Jeremy asked a great question. He asks us to discuss some of the advantages and disadvantages of a district-wide implementation versus a pilot school situation. And before we all dive in with our answer to that question, I'm going to ask the panelists first. So would any of the panelists like to unmute and give their perspective?
We've had a lot of success with pilot programs. Especially in schools where the residential program in the surrounding area are successful, we've just kind of mirrored those. But what I found is if you don't have a plan set in stone to take that pilot and expand it, we've had pilots that are ongoing and we haven't been able to take the next step and do the next school. So that would be my caution. I think it's okay to pick one or two schools and iron out the kinks, figure out what really works, but definitely have a timeline for, once you have the information to take it to the other campuses.
I could chime in on that one. I think pilots were great a number of years ago, but it's we have such the needle to move, and pilots can take more work, right? Versus if you kind of think about how can we get all the bins and signage out there by the trucks and straight delivery to where it's district wide. And then that way it's impacting everybody across the board versus just a couple champion custodians and then it's not fully embedded. Pilots definitely provide that learning material, but I think we've learned a lot over the years. So I always kind of recommend anything that can be district wide, more for the bang.
Agreed. Nancy, thank you so much. And I think we're going to move on to the next question. because I think, you know, there's a lot that could be said about that for sure. And, you know, we can probably have a whole session on that one, and how you go into a district if that relationship doesn't already exist. But Sarah asks, what innovations are districts using to track KPIs? Darya, I know you were talking about some of your tracking numbers. You want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, we track diversion rate, and that is Recology provides those numbers for us. And we could calculate them too, just based off of how many gallons of service we receive, and we track by volume. That's the way our service provider tracks as well, and so we track diversion rate. But as I mentioned, it's not super accurate. It needs to be paired with like how clean the streams are. And I think that's where a lot of cool technology that exists today. And if, you know, districts are in that place, and I know Sarah has a lot, you know, that's kind of her area of expertise, so she could probably speak more to this, but lots of cool sensors and things like that, that small districts I've seen implement since they've kind of reached their diversion goals, or like all the schools have composting service and recycling service, and they just want to make sure it's cleaner. There's super cool stuff out there that we've tried to explore, but it's so hard to kind of get districts to invest in that ahead of time. But now that we have these contamination fees coming down the line, I'm kind of like secretly like, yes, that's what we kind of needed to get things rolling. As soon as our like facilities officer and our custodial directors start realizing the hits to their budget. But it's going to take Recology starting to get on their tracking of how much we're contaminating, sending those reports to us, and then sending those fees along for that to kind of get rolling. But sorry, yeah, we only really track diversion rate at this time.
Okay. Anybody else have key performance indicators, KPIs that you're using? Panelists? Okay, I will just let you all know the Go Green initiative helps schools and districts use the Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool as a way to not just track their energy and water, but also their waste. It works out pretty well and gives you some great reporting capabilities, and it's a free tool. Our taxpayer dollars at work. Sarah also asked, for those districts that have a board resolution, does it include other materials other than the landfill materials? Compost and recycling. Does it also include things like e-waste, universal waste, and bulky items? Anybody have any info on how specific your board resolutions get?
So that I did chime in on the chat that we have, thanks to our relationship with waste management, and we have Dan that went nationally to look for all resolutions and policies that are out there nationally. So we have compiled all those together. We just set the transfer them over to a spreadsheet. So then we can kind of combine a couple templates for resolutions and plans that folks can reference, but it has a lot of that content that's included. So hopefully we can have that shared out within the next month.
Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. Anybody else have anything to add on board resolutions?
I'll just say ours does not track those things, but I wish it did, especially like the bulky items, because there is so much at the end of school. Like there's just tons of furniture, broken desks, things that just get left. And our custodial department is very aware and frustrated by this, and there's no kind of policy to help address it, bring resources to it. So they just use a huge chunk of their budget to just do these massive pickups, and they don't even have the time really to get the like scrap metal separated and recycled. It's like, I think it all just goes straight to Recology's landfill. And I'm not sure if they source separate there, but we don't handle any of it.
Just in case this is news to you, some of you will already know this, but a lot of school boards, when they're looking for language for their resolutions, in California, they go to CSBA, the California School Boards Association. That's the California arm of the National School Boards Association, and they have templates for policies just like this. That's why a lot of the integrated waste management policies that you see for districts up and down the state of California all look a lot the same. That's because they went to that site for boilerplate language. But if you're at the point where you're just starting that process, this is the opportunity to take that boilerplate language and add in some of those other types of waste streams. All right, I think we're just about at the time when I'm going to turn it back over to Ruth. We've reached the magic hour when it's time to close. But for any of you who did not get your questions answered, we will make sure that we reach out to you if you've put it in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jill, for facilitating those questions and answers. And thank you to all of our speakers. It was a really informative session and exactly what we were hoping it to be. So thank you guys so much. Stay tuned for our custodial union custodial webinar coming up on May 6th, and keep in touch with us through the NCRA and the NCRA schools website. And thank you all for coming.